Okay, next person to be pinned onto the chaise lounge this evening is Andy Roberts. Andy, welcome to the programme. Now, tell us a little bit first off about your background for our viewers.
Well, I started becoming interested in strange phenomena in the late 60s when my mother bought me a Dennis Wheatley book on holiday, and the whole black magic thing hooked me in. And I then read Jacques Vallée's book, Passport to Magonia, John Keel's book, Jadoo, and my entire adolescence was spent reading books on strange phenomena. I then got interested in the psychedelic drug culture of the 1970s, which I embraced with some enthusiasm, shall we say. And I learned from LSD experiences that reality is not quite as clear-cut as we like to believe. In the 80s, 90s and up to now, I've been a prolific Fortean investigator and writer on a number of subjects, primarily UFOs, but also folklore, Foo Fighters, the Big Grey Man of Ben McDowey, and many other subjects that I believe LSD opens up other realities to people, whether they're other dimensions or other levels of awareness and consciousness within humans. They do change how we see the world. And I mean, a classic example of how they've helped people is the famous physicist Kerry Mullis, I think it is, who discovered a very complicated chemical program, said he did that whilst under the influence of LSD, because for him time slowed down. He was able to recreate all the chemical compounds in his mind. He could move them around, he could do things slowly, speed them up, and he won the Nobel Prize for his discovery, basically. Many writers have functioned on LSD and created works of art. Ken Kesey, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, wrote that primarily whilst he was on LSD, and so on and so forth. It's been a huge influence on our culture that people don't really recognise. What's not known about it in Britain, as it first came to Britain in 1952, when it was brought to what was then called a mental hospital in Gloucestershire called Powick. And Dr. Ronnie Sanderson, who recently died a couple of weeks ago, opened up a specialised LSD unit there to treat patients and was extremely successful in treating alcoholism and other problems of the mind. Unfortunately, because of the hippie subculture's use of LSD in the 1960s, it was then banned, and of course the medical profession then stopped using it, so we lost a valuable tool. But it's recently been in the papers again that it is being used again for depression and so on. It's a valuable tool which the government don't really want people to know about.
Well, we had all this with cannabis, didn't we, a little while ago? It was declassified and then reclassified. If you look at the whole hemp issue, going back to times of prohibition in America, there's been a long debate about the good and the bad. And I think that LSD probably the same. You know, there are good and bad things with regards to it, depending on who's taking it and under what conditions. Now let's move on to ufology. It's another big love of yours that you've spent a lot of time with. I asked the question of previous guests on the programme with regards to what they think UFOs are. And there's been a lot of discussion at this particular conference about whether or not it's little green men from foreign planets, or whether or not it's black ops craft, or whether there's perhaps a mixture of different explanations. What's your own view from the work that you've done on what a UFO is?
My own view is that people in all cultures throughout all times have always seen unexplained phenomena in the sky. It's been called by many, many different names. I mean, in the Western culture, I think there's several woodcuts from the Middle Ages where people were looking at what they call flying shields. Then in the late 19th, early 20th century, people were seeing phantom airships. That moved on to phantom aeroplanes, ghost rockets, Foo Fighters in the Second World War, and then post-1947 we had the flying saucers. So people are seeing things and they're terming them what's culturally acceptable, because obviously we didn't think about aliens in the 14th century, so we call them flying shields. You know, we didn't know about phantom airships being, the airships being the next coming thing in the late 19th, early 20th century, but people were seeing them everywhere. So it seems that people interpret what they see at the very fringes of science, and post-1947, with the space race, people are starting to think about outer space. So I think it will change again, and if you were sitting here 200 years from now, interviewing a version of me then, I'd be saying people are calling them something else. It's what those things are, and they aren't one thing. There are a variety of things perceived as the current cultural icon of the day, and people are misperceiving things like nowadays aeroplanes, stars, planets, meteorological phenomena, test aircraft that the government are testing, and so on and so forth. But it's been codified by the papers primarily into aliens are little green men. But to answer your question, or to answer what I think is your question, is I don't think that aliens are visiting Earth.
Now, somebody asked a question in the question and answer session today, which sort of hit a nerve for me, about whether or not we should be looking down rather than looking up. You know, are some of these things amphibian? Are they coming from under the Earth rather than above? And this is the work that quite a few ufologists have been doing in America right now, that there's something coming from underneath the surface or underwater bases. What do you make of that?
I think it's as likely as things coming from outer space, i.e. not very likely, and the whole subterranean notion of origin for UFOs or aliens has been around for a long time. I mean, in the 40s there's a Richard Shaver thing who believed in the Deros and the Terus who lived in caves and so on and so forth. I just don't think it's happening. I'd want to see proof rather than stories. To me, these accounts of things coming out of the sea are no different to accounts of sea monsters or fairies or gnomes or elves or any of those things. They're good stories. People are seeing things, and I'm not in any way dissing the witnesses, but it's what those witnesses are seeing and interpreting that I think that they're getting wrong. I think what we should be studying is the most mysterious creature of all, which is the human brain.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. That is a mysterious creature. Now, what's your talk about here in Warminster this weekend?
I'm talking about the Berwyn Mountain UFO crash, about which I have a new book out called UFO Down. Do you want me to expand on that? Well, it's been called Britain's Roswell, or certainly the Welsh Roswell, and it's certainly the second most famous UFO crash incident to Rendlesham, in the British Isles. What happened was on the night of January 23rd, 1974, in the Berwyn Mountains of North Wales, there was a huge explosion. The earth shook, a massive noise and rumbling and shaking, followed immediately by very, very bright light streaking across the sky. Thousands of people rushed out into their gardens and the streets and saw these things and felt it. And they thought an aeroplane had crashed initially. Police switchboards were jammed. There was chaos. A local nurse, Pat Evans, went up on the mountain road hoping she could give some help to crash victims before the emergency services got there, and saw a massive ball of light on the mountainside, too far away from her to get to, and she didn't know what it was. At the time, the mystery was never solved, but it became apparent that there was a genuine earthquake that night, which was recorded in Scotland and various other places, and there was also a meteor shower. So the logical explanation is that it was just a simple coincidence of a meteor shower and an earthquake. But ufologists over the years have turned this into a crash case, and they think a UFO has crashed and it was retrieved from the hillside, and there's lots of stories but very little evidence. But I've sort of discounted that side of it, and I'm concentrating more on what Pat Evans the nurse saw, because there's no doubt about it. I believe that she saw a huge ball of light on the mountainside with vehicle lights and torchlights coming towards it. Now, whether that was a crashed UFO and she saw a crash retrieval team moving towards it, or whether it was some natural phenomena like an earth light perhaps, or some plasma ball, I don't know. But at first I thought I'd solved that case. As you know, I'm regarded widely as a skeptic, and I thought I got that case completely nailed down. I thought what Pat had seen was a misperception of a poacher's light refracted through drizzle and sort of appeared large. I now know that the poachers weren't on that particular part of the mountainside, so I've had to change my theories, and I've had to change it to the fact that I have no idea what she saw. So as far as I'm concerned, the Berwyn Mountain case is still very much alive.
It's an interesting one. I look forward to that. Just to finish off and to round up, you say that you're probably erring on the sceptical side. I think most of us do now, the ingenuine UFO research. And this is why I've distanced myself from some of the organisations in the last year or so, because I think too many people now are jumping at everything. Every Chinese lantern is a UFO, and that's not doing ufology any good at all. And the same goes with paranormal research. Since programmes like Most Haunted have been on air, they've probably done more damage to genuine paranormal research than perhaps anything else in recent years. And it does take people to come along and say, hold on a minute, let's be rational, let's be logical. What message would you give to the audience out there who are following this, that are actually out there researching? What would you tell them to do?
I tell them to be thorough, to check things back to the source, back to the original witnesses, the original newspaper cuttings, and not to go on what people say. If someone says something happened, you need backup evidence for it. And the best way of creating a case report is to find interlocking evidence like jigsaw pieces that fit together. But in all this, one thing I would say is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just reducing a case to its component parts and saying, I've solved it, isn't it. the mystery and the magic is in what created that case in the first place, and why people believe in what they saw. You might be able to reduce it to a series of simple elements of misperception, but it's the creation itself that is the magic, and that's part of being alive, being human in this fantastically mysterious universe that we live in.
Andy, do you have a website people can go to?
I don't, unfortunately, but if people type my name into Google, you can usually find many of my articles.
Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you.